Her head still spinning from its collision with the floor, Zoe crawled over the cold, wet concrete floor to the warehouse to the machine. "Turn it off!" shouted Dad. Zoe rushed to the lever on the side, but try as she might, she couldn't get it to budge. "It's stuck," she called up. "Grab the ladder then." Zoe looked. The step ladder was lying on its side on the ground where it had fallen. "Quick!" shouted Dad. "Eek!" shouted Armitage, wrapping his little tail as tight as he could round Dad's free hand. Okay, I'm coming," called Zoe. With all her strength, the little girl righted the ladder and ran up the steps. At the top, she peered down into the huge machine. It was like looking down into the mouth of a monster. The metal grinders were like teeth that would chomp you to bits. "Here," said Dad, "take Armitage." Zoe reached down to take the little rat from her father's hand. Dad passed Armitage up, his legs and feet still bound together by metal wire. She hugged him close to her chest and kissed him on the nose. Armitage, are you all right?" Dad looked up at this moving reunion and rolled his eyes. "Never mind about him, what about me?" he yelled. "Oh, yes, sorry, Dad," said Zoe. She put Armitage in her breast pocket and then crouched down on the ladder and offered her hand to pull her father out. However, Dad was heavy and Zoe wobbled precariously at the top of the ladder, nearly falling headfirst into the machine. "Careful, Zoe," said Dad. "I don't want to drag you in too." Zoe took a couple of steps back down the ladder and curled her feet around the steps to form an anchor. She then reached out her arms and Dad held on to them and finally pulled himself to safety. After climbing down the ladder, Dad yanked on the lever and turned off the machine and lay exhausted on the floor. "Are you okay, Dad? Are you okay?" asked Zoe, standing over him. "A few cuts and bruises," he said, "but I'll live. Come here, your old dad needs a cuddle. I do love you, you know." "I always knew, and I love you too." Zoe lay down next to her father, and he put his long arms around her. As he did so, she took Armitage out of her pocket, carefully untied his legs, and together they had a big family cuddle. Just then Armitage interrupted. "Eek, eek," he said before doing a little dance to draw Zoe's gaze up to the tower of rats, still so cruelly squashed into cages. "I think Armitage is trying to tell us something, Dad." "What?" "I think he wants us to set his friends free." Dad looked up at the towering wall of cages, which all but reached the ceiling of the warehouse. Every cage was squashed full of poor, starving rats. "Yes, of course, I quite forgot." Dad moved the ladder over to the cages, then stood on top of it, and with Armitage safely back in her pocket, Zoe climbed onto his shoulders to reach the top cage. "Steady," said Dad. "Make sure you've got my feet." "Don't worry, I've got you." Zoe finally managed to open the first of the cages. The rats clambered out as fast as they could and then used the little girl and her dad as a ladder to climb down to the safety of the ground. Soon Zoe had opened all of the cages and thousands of rats were running excitedly around the warehouse floor, enjoying their newfound freedom. Then Zoe and her dad broke open the tank of cockroaches, which had narrowly escaped being ground into ketchup. "Look," said Dad, "or actually don't look, you're too young to see this." Of course, as you must know, reader, there is nothing more guaranteed to make a child look than somebody saying that. Sure enough, Zoe looked. It was the freshly made Bert and Sheila burgers. The rats were devouring them greedily, finally having their revenge. Oh dear, said Zoe. Well, at least they're getting rid of the evidence, said Dad. Now come on, we better get out of here. Dad took his daughter's hand and led her out of the warehouse. Zoe looked back at the battered van. What about the burger van? Bert won't need it anymore. Oh yes, but what on earth are we going to do with it? Asked Dad, looking at his daughter quizzically. Well, said Zoe, I have an idea. Winter turned to spring as the van was redecorated. Just removing the grease that had built up on every surface of the vehicle inside took a week. Even the steering wheel was thick with slime. However, the work didn't seem like work because Zoe and her dad did most of it together. And it was surprisingly fun. Because he was so happy, Dad didn't go to the pub once, and that made Zoe happy too. There was a snag, of course, being unemployed. Dad only received a small amount of benefits money. It was a pittance. It was barely enough to feed him and his daughter, let alone refurbish a van. Fortunately, Dad was an ingenious sort. He'd found lots of bits and pieces he needed for the van from the rubbish dump. He rescued an old discarded little freezer and repaired it. He used that to keep the lollies cold in. An old sink was just the right size to fit in the back of a van for rinsing the scoops. Zoe found an old funnel from a skip, which, with a bit of paint and paper mache, the father and daughter managed to fashion into an ice cream cone to stick on the front of the van. And so it was finally done. Their very own ice cream van. Zoe's suspension from school was being lifted tomorrow. However, there was still one final decision, one major, crucial thing they had to make their minds up about. One really important, outstanding matter. What to write on the side of the van. You should name it after you, said Zoe as they stepped back to admire their handiwork. The van stood gleaming in the afternoon sun in the car park of the estate. Dad held a brush and a pot of paint in his hand. No, I have a better idea, he said with a smile. Dad lifted his hand up to the side of the van and started painting the letters. Zoe looked on, intrigued. A was the first letter. Dad, what are you writing? Shh, you'll see. Then R, then M. Soon Zoe had it too and couldn't resist shouting out, Armitage! Ha ha, laughed Dad. Armitage ices. I love it, said Joey, jumping up and down with excitement. On the pavement, Dad added the I, then the T, then the A, G, E, the apostrophe, because everyone knows apostrophes are very important, then the S, and then the word ices. Are you sure you want to name it after him? I mean, he's just a little rat after all. I know, but without him, none of this would have happened. You're right, Dad. He is a very special little fellow. You never did tell me why you called him Armitage, by the way, said Dad. Zoe gulped. This was not the time to tell her father he'd written the name of a toilet on the side of his gleaming ice cream van. It's a long story, Dad. I've got all day. Right. Well, another day, I promise. In fact, I'd better just go and get him. I want him to see what we've done to the van. Armitage was all grown up now, and didn't fit in a blazer pocket anymore, so Zoe had left him in the flat. Zoe ran excitedly up the stairs of the tower block and rushed into her bedroom. Armitage was scuttling around Ginger Nut's old cage. Dad had liberated the cage from the pawn shop by exchanging it for a bumper box of prawn cocktail crisps his ex-wife had amazingly left uneaten. Of course, the room wasn't just Zoe's room anymore, not since the wall had fallen down. It was now a room twice the size that she shared with someone else, that someone else being Tina Trott. The council were meant to have repaired the wall ages ago, but it was still down. To Zoe's surprise, when she entered the room, Tina was kneeling beside the cage and tenderly feeding the little rat little crusts of bread through the bars. "What are you doing?" asked Zoe. "Oh, I thought you might be a little peckish. I hope you don't mind." "I will take over, thank you," replied Zoe, snatching the food out of Tina's hand. She was still suspicious of everything the big girl did. After all, Tina was the one who flobbed on Zoe's head every day on the way to school. The misery she'd forgotten would not be easily... The misery she'd caused would not be easily forgotten. "Do you still not trust me?" asked Tina. Zoe thought for a minute. "Let's just hope the council gets the wall up soon," she said eventually. "I don't mind," said Tina. "I've enjoyed sharing a room with you, actually." Zoe said nothing. The silence hung in the air for a moment. Tina started to fidget. "Ah!" thought Zoe. "Stop feeling sorry for Tina Trotts." The thing was, though, in the past few weeks, Zoe had come to understand a lot more about Tina's life, how her horrible father screamed at her most nights. I have to stop there, click straight on. We find out the end of our tale and how their lives develop.